Welcome to Revive Ministries Podcast. This month, we begin our journey through a new theme, processing our pain, tribute to PTSD Month. Just a few decades, actually in the 1980s, PTSD was actually defined as an illness that doesn't derive from human weakness. This was one quote from Eric Jertian. No one escapes pain, fear, and suffering. Yet from pain can come wisdom. From fear can come courage. From suffering can come strength. If we have the virtue of resilience. This idea that we can process pain can shape the kind of healing we may receive in the long run is part of the theme topic we're going to be addressing today. Today we have a new guest. If I butcher your name, I'm sorry. Is it Kelsey? Kelsey?
Yes.
Okay, Kelsey, thank you for coming on and sharing your insight with us today.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for having me. I sure appreciate it.
Well, before I always begin, I have a disclaimer. If you are in crisis, please seek appropriate professional help immediately. Crisis hotline in the United States is 1-800-273-8255, the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline. I'm going to share a quote because people have said it better than I. I know I shared one before, but this one's a little shorter, I promise. It says, true self-discovery begins where your comfort zone ends. Adin Ron. What comes to mind when you hear this quote?
It reminds me of EMDR therapy, which is a special kind of therapy that is used for treating post-traumatic stress. It involves going to the throat of the trauma first, the very worst of it, and then working your way backwards. And, you have to step outside of that comfort zone to be able to heal.
Yeah, and what of those who don't know what EMDR therapy, I know you explained some of that. What was your experience doing the EMDR therapy? How long was it for you?
It's still ongoing. I've been doing it since probably August of 2021.
Okay.
Starting at the worst of my trauma and then working my way back, because there's PTSD and then there's complex PTSD where you have sustained trauma for a significant amount of time that causes, so there's layers. It's like an onion, like Shrek. You're peeling back the layers with EMDR. And it has been worth it. It's been very freeing for me, and it's made it so that I can help other people.
Well, I'm saying this also because I'm actually going through EMDR therapy myself.
Yeah.
So it's different for everyone. They have different modalities of doing it. Sometimes I'm actually doing it online. Well, with my therapist over the computer with a program, which actually it's not as bad as it sounded. It actually is working pretty well. So I am benefiting from it. So, I want to ask you, would you mind sharing? I know a lot of times I get guests here, and I always appreciate it's you're coming out here, you're being vulnerable, you're sharing. So would you mind sharing a little bit about your story and why is it important to remember PTSD? Mental health is May and it gets more of the attention, but PTSD is a huge part of what's going on and what people are experiencing. So what would you like to share?
Yeah, absolutely. So my story that really triggered my PTSD is the story of my daughter, Hope. At 17 weeks pregnant, we found out that the daughter that I was carrying, Hope, had osteogenesis imperfecta type 2, which is the lethal version of brittle bone disease. So all the bones in her body were broken. Her ribs were breaking in on her heart and her lungs, and her condition was actually threatening my life as well. And because of that, my husband and I made the difficult decision at 18 weeks to have an abortion. It wasn't an easy decision. This was a baby that we wanted, but at the same time, she was suffering, threatening my life. I had a 3-year-old son already and had a husband at home. It was an impossible choice for a parent, and we had to make it. And the PTSD comes from a lot of the challenges that, that are regulations that they put around abortion clinics, like asking me 6 times if I wanted to do it. And it's like, did I really want to be there doing it? No, but it's, it was a necessity at that time. That also had to do with the fact that they don't anesthetize you all the way because you're not in a hospital, you're in a clinic. They give you something called midazolam, which is supposed to help you forget the procedure and make you sleepy. But unfortunately, every time I fell asleep, I'd stop breathing. So they'd have to keep waking me up. So I remember all of the procedure. I remember seeing my daughter's body being, it was unfortunately in really bad shape from the disease that she had. And, it was incredibly painful. And that's where my PTSD stemmed from. That, and my husband was also not allowed in the room for the last part of the procedure either, because of government regulations. So I didn't have my traditional support system there with me. So it was a very hard time, a very hard situation, and it precipitated my post-traumatic stress disorder. I know a lot of people talk about military experiences and things like that, but the loss of a child is one that's not talked about very often.
I really appreciate you sharing that, because a lot of times, trauma comes in all forms. I think with COVID that we went through, a lot of people lost loved ones. One of my closest friends lost, he actually been on the podcast. He lost his father on Christmas Day. One of his favorite days. And I used to laugh because he was like Elf. Like when it gets close, he's like, it's like September. We need to get ready for Christmas. I'm like, what? But anyway, with that being said, it was hard, but he's one of my closest dear friends, and the loss is, traumatic. I can't imagine that, how we process through pain in the past. And I want to ask you, how have you processed now that you're doing EMDR therapy? What has worked and what has not? When it comes to processing your pain, moving forward, it's a journey. So what has worked and what hasn't?
Unfortunately, what hasn't worked has been reaching for spiritual guidance. Right after she died, we reached out to 7 churches to get her ashes blessed or get her prayed over, something like that. And all because she was a baby as a result of abortion, all 7 churches said no. And so that put a lot of distance between me and God for a while.
Yeah.
And, I've since, found my way back cautiously, but that hasn't worked as much. There's some people that it works so great for, and that's wonderful. EMDR has worked like a charm for me. What also has worked for me as well is last year I actually did my own kind of narrative therapy, and I wrote a book about my experience with abortion called Face Everything and Rise. And it talks not only about the procedure, but it also talks about experiencing PTSD. Because of my experience with the churches, I actually didn't seek help for about 2 months. And so the flashbacks were just raging, and I didn't know what was wrong. I thought I was just losing my mind. And finally my husband reached out to a psychologist and said, hey, my wife needs help. And I think the first session was an hour and 30 minutes because it was just divulging all of the stuff that I've been keeping inside me. And so therapy has helped, but writing the book about that process and what it took to face all of the things and rise has been incredibly healing, as well as for me, the trigger of the trauma is the procedure. And so in October of 2021, I actually went to the Women's March. And for the Women's March, I carried a sign that talked about my daughter Hope and I, my story on a sign. And, people came up to me and embraced me and hugged me and prayed with me and just loved on me. And it really, finding that community, people letting me be able to tell my story, really made the difference. And yeah, and from that, I decided to find From the Green Desk.
Yeah, and we'll get to it's one.
Yeah.
The book, all the information, those who are listening, will be in the notes. So if you want to check it out later, you can. I also want to say thank you for being just honest with this whole. It's hard, church. I know churches, unfortunately, have hurt a lot of people. I'm of the faith, but I know it has. So it's sometimes there's a lot of shouldn'ts, a lot of shame when it comes around. It's like, what did I do wrong? But one thing about I want to tell, because the name Revive Ministries kind of promotes the idea of faith based. It does not proselytize. Revive Ministries does not proselytize, but does encourage our guests to share hope. The idea is this: as a medical missionary, you go to another country. They usually bring like stuff like supplies, medication and stuff. I just try to provide a safe place to be heard. That's all. Continue that dialogue. I really like what you were saying, because when I was hearing all this, I was thinking a lot of times value is a lot of times not valued. Boundaries are a lot of times not. We don't put boundaries. Whatever is uniquely, I work in the mental health field, so a lot of times we talk about supportive resources, whatever that looks like. Sometimes coping skills. If you like fishing, go fishing. I don't know what it is. It's not just one thing. Some people like group settings when it comes to support groups. Some people don't. You gotta find what is your niche, and I do appreciate you just being candid and honest, because a lot of times we kind of say what we think other people want us to say. It's hard and it's a process, but I do appreciate you sharing that. And tell us more about this. Now, you talked about the Green Desk? Was it?
From the Green Desk.
From the Green Desk. Can you share a little bit about that?
Yes. So if you tell in the background, I work literally from a green desk. I wrote a book from a green desk. And it's a up-and-coming nonprofit where we provide coaching as well as group therapy and narrative meditation to people who have had abortions, lost pregnancies, lost babies, or lost children. Sorry, my dogs are
No, that's okay.
Barking in the background. Yeah, so we're able to, through these different alleys, we hope to eliminate something that I call the silent scream, which is the stigma that comes with these losses. Because unfortunately, with these losses and with post-traumatic stress, people just don't want to talk about it. And a lot of that repression, a lot of that, bottling up is what causes a deepening of the pain. And so we try to unmute the silent scream.
It's it's interesting. Sometimes I hear people, "Oh, I'm going to go on this trip because I'm miserable here." Well, you're taking you're taking yourself over there too. So it's prudent. I would say it is wise to consider your own self-care when it comes to, if you're not happy here, chances are you won't be happy elsewhere. So I do encourage those people who are listening, find what resources are out there. There's this one word. My wife has this book. It's untranslatable words in other languages. I'm going to butcher this word. It's harath. It's in Welsh. It says, a homesickness of somewhere you cannot return to, the nostalgia and grief from the lost places of your past, places that never were. It's interesting when we go to our schools, how we kind of get stuck in what we think, and our memory can be a little skewed or highly skewed, and it can be problematic when we're looking at recovery or how we process pain. So I find this harass word kind of weird, because how would you define a word that way? It's so specific but vague at the same time.
Yeah.
But I just want to, I really want to ask you. Well, the idea of, we were talking about, you told about your story, and I want to ask you, just progressing forward, what have been some notable elements that changed the way you looked at the pain you went through to be where you are today?
Writing it out. Honestly, the narrative therapy portion of it, where I was able to just get it, like release it out of me onto paper, out into the universe, has been incredibly freeing. I felt, even though it's obviously a story that I'll carry with me for the rest of my life, I felt the weight pull off of me in pieces, which was incredibly freeing. And again, the EMDR, being able to re-establish feelings or kind of turn the volume down on the flashbacks has been a game changer for me. Even with everything going on in the news right now, and everything going on that could be triggering for me, I'm able to turn this pain, this ball of grief, into a new ball of light for other people. And I think that's incredibly powerful. And if it wasn't for writing it out and for EMDR, I wouldn't be in that place to be able to help other people.
And the one thing is, I just remember before COVID, I was doing events in where I live near Florida, like doing little events, had people speak, and someone told me, you should do a podcast. I'm like, I don't know what I'm doing. Do a podcast. And I remember I had like a gaming headset. I was just trying at the beginning, but I was consistent. My whole theme was stories of recovery. It was my first kind of. And then one thing that I recognized that it's cathartic. I used to share my story a bit more, but it's also this whole essence of sharing. The idea of sharing. Support groups. Why do they exist? You have 4 women who may be domestically abused. They go and they share their story to each other. They feel better and they do better, but nothing on paper says they should feel better or do better. So there's something about it, whether you're faith-based or not. I find there's something about connections that matter. We're not islands. It's very apparent through this COVID how much we miss things. I remember going to the store and just feeling this tension to get out. And that's something I felt I lost when COVID happened, because we couldn't do much of anything. So I think I want to ask you one other question. And also, is there anything you would like to say to those listening who is struggling right now and feel any hope and want to avoid anything and everything? So it's incredible sometimes. Some people might laugh, but that we do anything at all. Like the fact that some people just show up, I'm just very happy, because we can make so many excuses not to do anything right now. It's amazing. True. It's like you could say I work from home and I get everything delivered. And then you don't close off. But what would you want to say to someone listening, struggling right now? Maybe they're on that cusp, but they feel and right now, and they feel like they want to avoid anything and everything. What would you share with them right now?
Have a battle buddy. Whether that is a spouse or a best friend or a coworker that you're close with, have someone else that's willing to say, hey, remember to put your oxygen mask back on because you forgot to do that yesterday and you're looking a little winded. Like for me, during these times, it was my husband and my best friend who who I've always called my battle buddy because we did search and rescue together. And between those two, they were on me like, when's the last time you showered? Did you shower? Did you use soap? Like, you know? When I was in my darkest times, they were there to make sure that, you know, there was, you know, one step was taken in front of the other. And for those that don't necessarily have that support system, find one. You know, go to group therapy, go to group counseling, AA, whatever you need to find that support system. And even though it might sound scary, all you need to do is take that first step. You don't necessarily need to say anything your first time. You don't need to share everything if you don't want to, but taking that first step is everything.
I think sometimes if we give ourselves a little grace, you know, these things, especially if these problems been going on for years, sometimes we're too quick that we want it done tomorrow or yesterday. And sometimes it just boils down to how we see ourselves. It plays a bigger role on how we approach conflict and disappointment. You know, the idea is, do we look at this disappointment as, oh my goodness, I messed up, I don't deserve anything? Or do we look at this, oh, that didn't work out, let me see how I could do it next? Or you might be tired and you're just like, oh, it didn't work out, and you just struggle, but you say, and then you get up and you show up the next day. And it's one of those things, the battle buddy, I like the idea, because a lot of times, even in the military, you have the buddy system. You have that idea that some days you'll be lucky to get out of bed and do what you normally do. You go 5 steps forward and then 7 steps backwards. But the idea is that you keep going. You know, I say this laughing, but it's something that makes me really. It's so simple, but sometimes we don't allow ourselves the ability to say, you know what, today was an awful day, but I'm going to try again tomorrow. And I think sometimes when we view ourselves differently, when we think that there's another day, it does give us that little energy. I want to share with those, again, who are in crisis. If you need immediate help, especially in the United States, this is the number 1-800-273-8255. I do not minimize the despair that people may be facing right now. But I do want to encourage you just to, you know, like what Kelsey said, what we've been speaking of, find a resource, find something, whether it's a support group, whether it's a church group, whatever works for you, whether it's just your friends, whether it's just doing music, whatever it is, find something that you gravitate to. Any final thoughts you want to share with those listening today? We're going to add all your notes so they can find out more about From the Green Desk, right? And then also about your book. So anything you want to share with those listening?
Don't wait to get help. I waited for 2 months, and it was the darkest 2 months of my life. And I came very close to it not being a life anymore. Don't wait. Get help now.
Thank you so much, Kelsey, for joining us. This discussion, I wanted it to continue. One thing I always say, the way I feel I'm doing good in podcasts is getting returning guests. So don't feel surprised if you get an email from me another time this year. But I want to say to those who are listening, always stay updated with Revive Ministries by the website, reviveministriesfl.com. We're also on YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, but you can find all those links on the website. This is goodbye from Revive Ministries Podcast, leaving with the last quote from Neil Strauss. It says, people go through so much pain trying to avoid pain.